the London Opera House of the year 18, was a cathedral of glittering chandeliers and velvet-clad whispers, a temple where reputation was currency and scandal a sword that cut deeper than any blade. Rain beat a relentless tattoo upon the cobblestones outside, as if the city itself wished to cleanse the sins and vanity within. Carriages drew up, wheels slicing through puddles, their occupants alighting with gloved hands and measured poise, stepping onto steps polished by the endless parade of aristocracy. Every face was a mask of civility, every posture a statement of birthright, and every whisper a potential dagger aimed at the unprepared. Amidst this congregation of wealth and pride, she arrived, a young woman of unassuming grace, yet with a spark in her eyes that belied her station. She was not of the ton, not draped in jewels or sculpted gowns that drew sighs of admiration. Yet, she carried herself with a dignity that defied her circumstances, a quiet challenge that society could scarcely tolerate. Her dress, modest but elegant, shimmered with the subtle glow of candlelight, each fold a testament to careful preparation, each hemline a rebellion against overindulgent fashion. And yet, society's gaze was merciless. Whispers rippled through the stalls, a tide of disapproval and curiosity. "Who is she, daring to attend among such company?" one lady murmured, her lace-gloved hand clutching a fan with trembling precision. "Do you see the audacity of her carriage?" another whispered, eyes narrowing. Every word landed like a pebble thrown into a still pond, spreading concentric waves of judgment that reached her ears even as she ascended the grand staircase. Her heartbeat was a drum beneath her corset, not of fear alone, but of anticipation. For she had a plan, a daring that most women of her acquaintance would never entertain. To stand here, in the gilded sanctum of the Duke's world, was to court peril and fascination alike. And she knew that peril had a name, the Duke himself, a man whose reputation preceded him like a dark storm cloud over the city. He was a figure both feared and revered, a man whose silence carried threats, whose glance commanded obedience, and whose wealth could sculpt destinies with a single whisper. And then he entered. Not with fanfare, not with a herald's proclamation, but with the quiet force of inevitability. The doors swung open, a hush falling over the audience as the Duke crossed the threshold. He was taller than expectation, broad-shouldered beneath a coat of deepest black, his face partially shadowed by the flickering candlelight. Every eye followed him, yet he sought none, his gaze scanning the room with precision until, inevitably, it fell upon her. Time seemed to falter. The music of the orchestra, the rustle of silk, the soft murmurs of curiosity, all faded beneath the weight of that singular moment. His eyes, dark as the storm-laden Thames, fixed upon hers. There was no cruelty there, nor indulgence. Only recognition, a quiet acknowledgment of a spirit unbowed, a flame daring to defy the tempest of expectation. The whispers around her grew louder, a chorus of judgment she could not ignore. A minor misstep, a stumble upon the polished floor, a faint hesitation as she curtsied in recognition of the distinguished company, was magnified, transformed into spectacle. Eyes widened, eyebrows arched, and the theater of high society's scrutiny claimed her as its protagonist. Some laughed softly, their lips veiled behind fans, while others whispered warnings of impropriety. And yet, she did not flinch. Her chin lifted, and in that defiant lift, she made her stand. In that instant, the opera hall was a battleground. Every gaze weighed upon her, yet within her breast, courage blossomed. She did not know why the Duke's eyes had singled her out, or whether it was fortune or folly that had placed her in his line of sight. All she knew was that the storm outside and the storm within were met with equal fire. She met his gaze as if daring the world to question her audacity, and in that silent exchange, a subtle, invisible tether was drawn, one that would stretch between them across the gilded theater, through whispered rumors and clandestine gestures, until it bound their fates irrevocably. The music swelled, and with each note, her heartbeat mirrored its rhythm. The orchestra was oblivious to the drama unfolding beyond the score, yet in every bow, every trill, every lingering chord, it seemed to echo the tension in her chest. She could feel the eyes of the ton pressing upon her, the silent judgment of old money and newer ambition, yet the Duke's gaze alone anchored her. There was no need for words. The intensity of that look spoke in volumes she would carry for years to come. And then, the unthinkable. A soft murmur, intended for another, but loud enough to reach her ears. Is she bold enough to think she belongs here? It was not a question. It was a challenge. Every fiber of propriety cried out for her to retreat, to melt into the shadows and allow the scandal to pass like a summer storm. Yet she remained, steadfast, a figure of poise against a tide of whispers and scrutiny. In that suspended moment, she was neither hero nor victim, neither conqueror nor subdued. She was simply there, present, unflinching, alive in a way that demanded recognition. And recognition came, though she could scarcely imagine its consequences. From across the hall, the Duke's eyes lingered, calm, commanding, and utterly singular. One look, and the tides of her life, once placid and predictable, were irrevocably shifted. The orchestra's final note echoed through the hall as though marking the threshold of a new chapter. A storm raged outside, rain dripping from the rooftops and pooling in the marble corridors, yet within the gilded opera, a different tempest had begun. One of silent claims and unspoken challenge, one of courage meeting authority, and one glance that promised a collision between society's iron rules and the human heart's indomitable will. And so, in that opening act, the stage was set, not merely for music or dance, but for a drama that would unfold across whispered scandals, secret confessions, and the delicate balance of fear, desire, and destiny. She had endured the public scrutiny, stood fearless before a terrifying duke, and in that fearless stance, unknowingly accepted the first spark of acclaim that neither time nor convention could easily undo. The days that followed the opera unfolded like a slow, deliberate waltz through fog-laden streets and candlelit parlors. London itself seemed to lean in closer, curious, whispering, eager to witness the drama that had taken root within its gilded society. She moved among the ton with measured steps, her posture impeccable, her eyes alert yet serene, aware that every glance, every whisper, could become tomorrow's scandal. The opera's memory lingered, a shadow and a spark entwined, pulling her through a world that measured worth in silks and in secrets. It began with subtle tokens, small gestures that carried weight far beyond their appearance. On a morning draped in mist, she discovered a single glove, of the finest leather, perched delicately upon her windowsill. Its color, black as midnight yet soft to the touch, hinted at thoughtfulness and intention. A note accompanied it, written in a hand she recognized from the night of the opera, elegant, precise, and commanding. For courage displayed, and for fortitude yet unseen. Yours, D. The initials alone sent a shiver down her spine, a whisper of acknowledgment from the man whose gaze had held her fast in the opera house. By candlelight that evening, a crimson rose appeared upon her writing desk, its petals fresh, its fragrance a subtle promise. Each delivery was meticulous, deliberate, leaving her to wonder at the orchestration behind these clandestine gestures. Who could orchestrate such intricacy if not a man of influence, power, and impeccable taste? The city thrummed with gossip, yet she remained composed, though her pulse betrayed the thrill and fear coursing through her veins. The line between admiration and danger blurred in ways that made each day an exquisite tension. Society, as ever, observed keenly. Whispers followed her in the drawing rooms, as subtly venomous as the lace fans that fluttered in polite hands. "The Duke," one matron murmured to another, "is not a man to linger on frivolities. Why then does he linger on her?" Another sniffed, a shiver of indignation masked as propriety. Each syllable was calculated, each glance an accusation. Yet she met these judgments with serene composure, her defiance quiet yet unmistakable. She had learned the art of appearing delicate while harboring a storm within, a storm matched only by the enigmatic Duke who pursued her interest with veiled intensity. The next gesture arrived on a fog-wrapped evening, a rare tome bound in crimson leather, its pages scented with lavender. Within, a message: "There are worlds in words, and courage in discovery. Meet me where the city sleeps, if you dare." Her heart raced, not merely at the audacity of the invitation, but at the undeniable magnetic force behind it. Each token was a test, a whisper of risk and reward, pulling her further into a narrative written in shadows and glances, a tale that society would neither forgive nor fully understand. "And yet," she ventured, for curiosity mingled with a bravery she did not fully recognize in herself. Carriage wheels crunched along rain-slicked streets as she approached the appointed meeting place, a private courtyard behind the Duke's residence. There, amidst the flickering lanterns and climbing ivy, he awaited, not with the swagger of arrogance, but with a presence that was commanding and measured. His eyes, ever dark and assessing, softened just enough to betray interest, a subtle acknowledgment of the tension that had begun to entwine their fates. Their conversation was a dance of words, each syllable chosen with the precision of a musician striking keys. "You move through society with unexpected courage," he observed, voice low, measured. "Few would endure the scrutiny you have borne, and fewer still would meet my gaze without faltering." She curtsied lightly, a gesture of decorum masking the rapid beating of her heart. "Sir, courage is not always deliberate. Sometimes it arrives unbidden, or is thrust upon one by circumstance." Their dialogue carried weight beyond the spoken word. Each phrase lingered, echoing in the spaces between, rich with unspoken promises and veiled challenges. Meanwhile, whispers persisted in the salons and drawing rooms. Gossip-mongers clutched their fans and pearls, trading conjectures that fluttered like moths around a flame. "She has caught his attention," one huffed. "But what audacity to do so uninvited! Surely her reputation will suffer." And yet, to the heroine, these murmurs were both shield and mirror, a reflection of the perilous allure she had unwittingly embraced. In every shadowed corridor and mirrored hall, she could feel the city's gaze, the weight of judgment pressing upon her shoulders, yet she did not retreat. The Duke's tokens continued, each more daring than the last. A rare locket, engraved with a subtle flourish that matched his seal, found its way to her hand. Inside, a miniature painting of a familiar scene, the opera hall, viewed from the Duke's perspective, with her figure poised and resolute at its center. The gesture was audacious, intimate, and dangerous. It suggested observation, and perhaps admiration, and the knowledge that she was already the subject of his private world, a world both forbidden and irresistible. Amidst these exchanges, she found herself drawn inexorably toward him, not merely as the object of curiosity, nor the target of admiration, but as a companion of intellect and subtle wit. Each encounter, each token, was a test and a lesson in courage, in the navigation of society's perilous currents. And in the quiet moments, when candles burned low and shadows stretched long across the marble floors, she began to perceive the man behind the reputation. Formidable, yes, terrifying even, yet capable of a tenderness hidden beneath layers of control and fearsome power. The city continued its whispers, the salons buzzed with speculation, and society's judgment sharpened like a keen-edged blade. And yet, through it all, she remained unbroken. Every glove, every rose, every locket, every whispered note was a thread weaving her ever closer into the tapestry of the Duke's intrigue. Their fates were no longer separate. Each gesture pulled her into a story that was only just beginning to unfold. By the end of the week, the scandal had reached a crescendo. Invitations arrived for encounters veiled in discretion and decorum. She realized, with a mix of trepidation and exhilaration, that she had become not merely an observer of society's judgment, but a participant in its most intimate and most dangerous dance. Each step she took brought her closer to the man whose power was matched only by his allure, and whose claim, though yet unspoken, weighed upon her with an undeniable gravity. The tokens, the whispers, the scandal, they were no longer mere incidents. They were instruments, orchestrating a slow, relentless melody of desire, challenge, and peril. And as the candlelight flickered against her reflection in the drawing-room mirror, she could not help but feel the first tremors of destiny, that in standing fearless before a terrifying duke, she had begun a journey that would alter not merely her reputation, but the very course of her heart. The night was hushed, a velvet quiet that wrapped the Duke's estate in secrecy. Outside, the fog rolled across the gardens in ghostly ribbons, curling around statues and iron gates, as if London itself wished to shield the unfolding truth from prying eyes. The grand halls, adorned with gilded frames and tapestries, seemed to hold their breath, awaiting a drama far subtler than any the opera could provide, a drama of hearts, of unspoken longings, and of confessions that might fracture decorum forever. She arrived, guided by the Duke himself, her steps careful on the polished marble floors. Each footfall echoed faintly, mingling with the soft crackle of firelight that danced across the portraits of ancestors whose gazes seemed to weigh upon her, questioning, judging. In this sanctuary of wealth and authority, she felt both small and significant, aware that each glance, each breath, could tip the scales of power in ways she could scarcely imagine. The Duke led her into a private salon, one rarely occupied by anyone outside his closest confidants. The air was heavy with the scent of rosewood and smoldering embers, and the firelight threw flickering shadows that painted the room in gold and amber. He gestured for her to be seated, a small yet deliberate command, and she obeyed, her spine straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. In the silence that followed, the weight of expectation pressed upon them both, yet it was not fear that lingered. Rather, it was anticipation, a trembling of the heart at the precipice of revelation. At last, the Duke spoke, his voice low and measured, carrying the authority of a man accustomed to command, yet softened by a rare vulnerability. "You move through society with courage uncommon among women of your standing," he began, eyes fixed upon hers with an intensity that seemed to pierce the veil of propriety. "Few would endure the scrutiny you have faced, and fewer still would meet my gaze without faltering. Yet here you are, unbowed. I find myself compelled to understand you." Her lips curved in the faintest of smiles, a shadow of amusement mingling with apprehension. "Sir," she replied, her tone steady despite the tumult in her chest, "courage is not always chosen. Sometimes it is thrust upon one by circumstance, or by necessity." The room seemed to inhale at her words, and for a moment neither of them spoke, each contemplating the other as if measuring the weight of the soul beneath the mask. The Duke moved closer, not in force but in deliberation, closing the distance that had separated them. "And yet, courage alone does not explain your presence here tonight," he observed, a subtle challenge threaded through the careful cadence of his voice. "You seek something more than mere endurance. What is it that you desire?" Her gaze faltered only briefly, caught between the siren call of honesty and the chains of propriety. She drew a measured breath. "I desire truth," she admitted softly, "even when it terrifies me, even when it stands against the world." A flicker of something unspoken passed through the Duke's eyes, a shadow of admiration, of recognition, and perhaps a trace of longing mirrored in her own chest. He placed a gloved hand upon a nearby table, leaning slightly, the firelight casting his features in chiaroscuro, harsh lines softened by the dancing light, shadows that concealed and revealed with equal cruelty. "Then you shall have it," he said, almost to himself, and yet she felt the promise resonate through the room. "But beware, truth, once revealed, has its own demands. It does not bend, it does not compromise, and it spares none of us from consequence." They spoke at length, words flowing like a measured waltz of confession and challenge. The Duke shared glimpses of his past, carefully chosen to reveal vulnerability without surrendering control. Tales of obligations, betrayals, and the suffocating weight of legacy painted him not merely as a figure of fearsome power, but as a man bound by circumstance as tightly as any prisoner. In turn, she shared fragments of her own life, the hardships endured, the quiet rebellions, the stolen moments of joy amidst societal constraint. In this exchange, each revelation became a thread, weaving a tapestry of trust and intrigue between them. A subtle intimacy grew from the space between spoken words. An accidental brush of the hand, a tilt of the head to meet a flicker of emotion, a shared smile that lingered just long enough to ignite desire, all contributed to a tension that was more potent than any declaration. The room seemed to bend around them, aware of the fragile electric thread that now connected their hearts, a bond unacknowledged yet undeniable. The evening stretched onward, and with every candle that burned low, the confessions deepened. She found herself laughing at a rare moment of levity in his otherwise stern countenance, and he, in turn, allowed a brief flicker of softness, a rare and dangerous indulgence. They were both aware of the precarious balance. One misstep, one revealing word spoken too loudly, and society's judgment would descend upon them like a storm. Yet the risk seemed a worthy one, for in the quiet intensity of the Duke's gaze, she glimpsed not cruelty but an invitation, an acknowledgment that she could, if she dared, enter a realm where passion and power entwined inextricably. By the night's end, a fragile understanding had been forged. She would not flee, nor would she fully surrender, but the seed of connection had been planted, one nurtured by courage, tempered by social constraint, and watered by the subtle intimacies of shared vulnerability. And in that room, illuminated by firelight and shadow, both recognized that the world beyond these walls, gossiping salons, judgmental peers, the ever-watchful eyes of London society, could not contain the stirring of hearts now entwined in ways unspoken, unseen, and undeniably potent. A final glance was exchanged before she departed, a look that conveyed more than words ever could. It was both challenge and promise, caution and invitation. One day, she knew, they would speak more boldly, move more openly, and face the world with hearts laid bare. But for now, the confession remained private, a secret echoing in the corridors of the Duke's estate and in the chambers of her own heart. And as she stepped into the night, the fog curling around her like a lover's embrace, she understood with certainty. The story had truly begun, and nothing would remain the same. The London Opera House again loomed before her, a cathedral of gilded gold and flickering candlelight, yet tonight it seemed transformed. Every polished banister, every velvet seat, every delicate chandelier shimmered not merely with opulence, but with anticipation, a tension that vibrated through the very walls. Society had been abuzz for days, whispers growing louder, speculation turning to certainty. The Duke's attention, once private and measured, was now the subject of scrutiny and scandal. And she, the fearless heroine who had dared to meet his gaze weeks ago, walked these corridors with heart pounding, aware that the stakes had never been higher. He awaited her in the private box, a place both visible and secluded, overlooking the glittering assembly. His presence was commanding, as ever, yet softened by the subtle light of the opera hall. He rose as she approached, every motion deliberate, eyes locking upon hers with intensity that made the crowd around them fade into insignificance. In that gaze, society's judgment and expectation were powerless. "Tonight," he began, his voice low, measured, but resonant enough to carry to the edges of their secluded space, "you shall no longer be unseen, nor shall your courage be unnoticed." Every word held the weight of a declaration, a challenge to the whispered scandals that had shadowed her steps. "I claim you, not in defiance of propriety, but in recognition of what others fail to comprehend, the strength, the dignity, and the fire within you." A hush seemed to descend upon the hall, though no one but they could hear the gravity of his words. Yet even within the Duke's private box, the significance was undeniable. A subtle tilt of his head, a gesture of open invitation, conveyed both protection and possession. He did not speak loudly, for loudness would be crude. He claimed her in the language of subtlety, of influence, and of undeniable presence. She understood, heart racing, that a single word, a glance, could change everything. Her response was measured, a mixture of acknowledgment and independence. "Sir," she said softly, voice clear and unwavering, "to be seen is a privilege, and to be understood, a rare gift. You honor me more than I can express." Her words, though gentle, held conviction. She did not bow entirely, for she had learned the art of standing with grace without surrendering her spirit. Her fingers lightly touched the edge of the box's railing, poised as though anchored to her own strength even as the Duke's eyes drew her closer, magnetized by the depth of her resolve. Around them, the orchestra's melodies swelled and ebbed, the music a mirror of the rising tide of emotion in the private box. The chandelier's light played upon their faces, casting both shadow and glow, a visual symphony of restraint and revelation. Every gesture mattered. The slight incline of a head, the measured breath, the subtle brush of a gloved hand upon a railing. Each movement carried weight, for they were dancing not with feet but with hearts, navigating the perilous steps of propriety, passion, and societal expectation. A rival or two cast furtive glances from below, eyes alight with curiosity and envy. Yet the Duke's presence was an unyielding barrier, and her own poise made clear that neither gossip nor scrutiny could dictate her choices. In that rare moment, they were unassailable, a pair united not merely by attraction, but by recognition of courage, dignity, and unspoken longing. Then came the most daring of gestures. The Duke, standing tall, extended his hand, not with command, but with invitation, a silent proclamation that carried both respect and claim. She hesitated for a heartbeat, aware of the eyes that might be upon them, the society that would dissect every motion, every glance. And yet, in that instant, the weight of judgment seemed inconsequential. Her fingers brushed against his, a deliberate yet subtle surrender to connection, and the world beyond their box blurred to insignificance. "Together," he whispered, tone low and resolute, "we shall navigate the tempest, not as prey to society's cruelty, but as participants in a tale of our own making." His words were not mere flattery or empty promises. They were a covenant, binding and intimate, articulated with both authority and tenderness. She felt the truth of them resonate deep within her, a surge of warmth that dispelled weeks of doubt, fear, and uncertainty. The music swelled to its crescendo, and with it, their unspoken pact was sealed. A glance was exchanged, slow, deliberate, full of nuance and meaning. In that shared gaze lay acknowledgment of danger, recognition of mutual respect, and the spark of a desire both profound and perilous. Neither needed to speak further. The heart's language had been uttered in silence, in courage, and in the quiet assertion of self amidst a sea of expectation. As the opera continued, they remained in their secluded vantage, yet fully present to one another. Whispers of scandal still drifted through society, as inevitable as shadows at sunset, but the declaration had shifted the balance. She was no longer merely observed, no longer merely whispered about. She had been claimed, yet not subdued, recognized, yet not diminished. The Duke's acknowledgment had transformed public scrutiny into a backdrop for intimacy and power, a stage upon which their hearts could navigate the treacherous waters of passion and propriety alike. By the end of the performance, a quiet resolution had settled between them. She descended from the box, the faintest hint of a smile playing upon her lips, and he followed with measured steps, always close, always aware, a silent protector and devoted partner in the intricate dance of society. Outside, the fog hugged the city streets once more, indifferent to human drama, yet within the hearts of two who dared to claim one another, the world had shifted irrevocably. Tonight, she had been seen, recognized, and honored. Tonight, the Duke had spoken in ways society could scarcely comprehend. And though challenges remained, whispers, envy, and the ever-watchful eyes of London society, both understood that the tide had turned. Their connection, forged in courage, tested by scandal, and solidified by private confession, would carry them through the trials yet to come. And so, in that climactic declaration, the opera hall became more than a stage. It became a witness to the assertion of heart and spirit, a cathedral of both passion and restraint, where one fearless woman and a terrifying, yet devoted Duke began to chart a future defined not by society's judgment, but by the unyielding, undeniable force of their bond. The carriage wheels crunched over the frost-hardened cobblestones, echoing through the pre-dawn stillness as if heralding an unspoken reckoning. Fog curled like a ghostly veil around the lamps, dimming the city to shadow and silver, and she pressed her gloved hands together, the cool leather grounding her trembling pulse. The streets were nearly deserted, save for the distant clatter of merchants' carts and the occasional figure hurrying through the mist, oblivious to the private tempest that swirled within her chest. Tonight, she would no longer merely endure scrutiny or whispered judgment. Tonight demanded resolution, an acknowledgment that dared to defy society's rigid lattice of propriety. The Duke rode beside her, silent as the mist, his presence a gravitational pull that both steadied and unsettled her. He was magnificent in his quiet command, his coat brushing the floor of the carriage, shoulders squared against the night's chill, eyes dark pools reflecting the lantern light and, she suspected, the fire within her own heart. Not a word had passed between them for minutes, though neither felt the absence. The tension between them spoke volumes, measured in shared glances, the subtle incline of his head, the way his fingers flexed around the reins as though restraining more than the horse's pace. When the carriage reached the Duke's private garden, she hesitated at the threshold, the wrought iron gate casting long, angular shadows across the frost-kissed gravel. He offered no hand, no invitation of ceremony, merely the unyielding gaze that had held her in thrall since that first night at the opera. She drew a breath, inhaling the crisp scent of winter roses and damp earth, and stepped forward, each footfall deliberate, a rhythm of courage she had cultivated through weeks of whispered scandal, clandestine tokens, and private confessions. The garden, shrouded in mist and moonlight, seemed both a sanctuary and an arena, poised to witness the final declaration of hearts long tested by fear, desire, and society's relentless gaze. He came closer, the distance between them shrinking until the heat of his presence brushed the chill from her skin. Her pulse fluttered as though it sought escape, yet she remained rooted, facing the storm she had willingly courted. He lowered his voice, soft yet resonant, every syllable deliberate. "You have walked a path few would dare, faced scrutiny without faltering, and yet you linger, not in defiance, but in quiet truth. Tonight, that truth must be named, if you have the courage to hear it." Her eyes met his, unwavering, despite the tremor in her chest. "I have learned," she whispered, voice steady though laden with emotion, "that courage is not merely survival, but acknowledgment of what we cannot deny. I have come to understand, sir, that some truths demand risk, and some hearts cannot be swayed by fear." A slow, deliberate smile curved his lips, almost imperceptible yet devastating in its intensity. He extended his hand, but this time it was more than a gesture. It was a claim, measured, undeniable, yet tempered with reverence. "Then let this night be witness. Not merely to defiance, nor to courage, but to the joining of what the world may never fully comprehend. Strength and vulnerability, dignity and desire, two hearts that have survived the weight of judgment and emerged unbroken. She placed her hand in his, the touch sparking an electric current that seemed to ripple outward, stirring the frozen garden into life. The mist swirled around them, caught in the glow of a lantern, casting their shadows together, long and intertwined upon the frost-hardened gravel. For a heartbeat, the world contracted, leaving only the two of them, a universe contained within the grip of hands, the silent communication of shared breath, and the tremulous acknowledgment of passion restrained yet undeniable. "You speak of courage," she said, her tone low, intimate. "Yet it is your claim that terrifies me most. Not because of fear of scandal, nor because of what society may say, but because the weight of your presence overwhelms reason. And yet, I do not retreat." Her words, deliberate and measured, carried both defiance and surrender, a delicate equilibrium that matched his own restraint. He drew her closer, the warmth of his coat brushing against her own, the scent of him, tobacco, cedar, and something indefinably his, wrapping around her senses, grounding her in a reality both exhilarating and perilous. "Then we are agreed," he murmured, so close that her ear caught every nuance, every carefully modulated intonation. "Not as conqueror and subject, nor as tyrant and prey, but as partners in a world that would seek to deny us what is already ours by right of heart." The garden seemed to breathe around them, a hush settling over hedges, statues, and rose bushes. A single lantern flickered, throwing light upon the frost, casting reflections that danced like specters on the gravel. She lifted her gaze to meet his fully, no longer fearful, no longer constrained by the fragile decorum that had governed her every action in society. Here, in this suspended moment, she was free, free to claim what had always been hers, though society had yet to sanction it. "You have seen me," she whispered, "and yet you remain. You have watched my defiance, my fear, my caution, and you have chosen to remain." Her words were both question and declaration, challenging him to speak the truth that had long hovered behind his gaze. "I have," he replied, voice firm, resonant, carrying both promise and certainty. "And I shall remain, until the world bends to what we already know. Your heart, unbowed, has earned more than admiration. It has earned a claim, not a conquest, but a covenant." The words fell between them like firelight, illuminating the contours of possibility, of futures unimagined yet inevitable. She felt the surge of emotion, a tremor that coursed from chest to fingertips, grounding her, releasing her, and binding her all at once. Her gloved hand tightened in his, an acknowledgment of the delicate yet unbreakable thread now connecting their fates. A carriage bell tolled in the distance, distant but insistently rhythmic, yet the moment held, unbroken, impervious to the outside world. The Duke's other hand brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, and she leaned slightly, allowing the warmth of proximity, the electricity of acknowledgment, to infuse her being. Around them, the garden remained silent, bearing witness to the culmination of weeks of subtle gestures, whispered challenges, and quiet defiance. She drew a slow breath, the mist curling around her, and allowed herself a rare smile, a smile unguarded, luminous, and triumphant. "Then let us step forward together," she said, voice carrying the weight of acceptance, defiance, and hope. "Let society whisper, let gossip fume. We walk our path, and no shadow shall obscure what is ours to claim." He inclined his head, his lips brushing the shell of her ear in a gesture both protective and intimate. "Together," he confirmed. And in that single word, the finality of the claim, the exhilaration of mutual surrender, and the acknowledgment of courage and dignity all converged. The world could wait. Society could murmur, frown, and dissect, but in that frost-kissed garden, in the quiet hush of pre-dawn, they were sovereign, bound by choice, heart, and unspoken devotion. They stepped into the carriage together, their fingers entwined, the mist closing around them like a curtain on the first act of a story that would unfold through winters, salons, and opera halls alike. The horses moved with a steady, measured pace, carrying them through the silent streets, yet within them burned a heat and certainty no chill could diminish. They had faced scrutiny, survived scandal, and claimed each other without compromise. The city, indifferent to the private triumph within its fog-laden streets, bore on as it always did, yet for them, time had paused, and the world had narrowed to a single truth. Courage, when coupled with recognition and daring, yields a claim that even society cannot erase. As dawn tinged the horizon with pale gold, their eyes met again, and in that gaze was both promise and understanding, an unspoken agreement that no shadow of judgment could unsettle. And so, beneath the shroud of mist and early light, the fearless woman and the terrifying duke embarked upon a future forged in defiance, passion, and mutual acknowledgement. The world beyond might still whisper, society might still frown, yet within their hands, their hearts, and their shared conviction, lay a truth impervious to time. They had claimed each other irrevocably, and the first act of scandal had given way to the enduring triumph of courage, dignity, and love unbound.